Joe Rogan, a prominent voice in the world of combat sports, has weighed in on the potential matchup between Jake Paul and Canelo Alvarez, a fight that has stirred considerable debate and skepticism within the boxing community. While Paul has publicly expressed his desire to face Alvarez, Rogan remains unconvinced that the fight will actually materialize, citing Alvarez's busy schedule and the prevailing sentiment that Paul, despite his success against former UFC fighters, is not yet in Alvarez's league. Rogan acknowledges Paul's achievements in the boxing ring, particularly his victories over former UFC champions. He concedes that if Paul were not already known as a YouTube personality, his boxing prowess might be more readily accepted. Rogan points out that knocking out a former UFC welterweight champion, especially one of the best ever, is a significant accomplishment that should not be dismissed. However, he tempers this praise by noting that power does not always translate effectively as fighters move up in weight classes. Despite Paul's confidence and ambition, Rogan believes that a fight against Alvarez is a step too far at this stage of his career. He highlights Paul's split-decision loss to Tommy Fury as evidence that he still has much to prove before he can be considered a legitimate contender for Alvarez's attention. Rogan suggests that Alvarez, who is at the pinnacle of his boxing career, has more pressing concerns than waiting around for Paul to develop into a worthy opponent. Rogan emphasizes that Alvarez is a big-money fight, which is why so many boxers are eager to face him. However, he believes that Alvarez is primarily focused on securing the most lucrative and meaningful fights possible, and a matchup against Paul may not meet those criteria. Rogan acknowledges that while Boots Ennis is a formidable fighter, he lacks the mainstream recognition of Alvarez, making a potential fight between them less appealing from a financial standpoint. Rogan also addresses the perception that many people dislike Paul simply because of his background as a YouTuber. He argues that this bias prevents some from acknowledging Paul's genuine skills and dedication to boxing. Rogan maintains that Paul has already proven himself by defeating multiple UFC champions and that he should be given credit for his accomplishments. During a discussion with Post Malone, Rogan reiterated his belief that Alvarez is an absolute beast in the ring, praising his dominance, skill, and power. He also speculated about the possibility of Paul transitioning to MMA, noting that he has a contract with the Professional Fighters League, PFL. Other boxing analysts share Rogan's skepticism about the likelihood of a Paul Alvarez fight. They point out that Alvarez is currently focused on preparing for his fight against Terence Crawford in September, which is a much more significant and challenging matchup. These experts believe that Alvarez is unlikely to divert his attention to Paul, especially given the perception that Paul is not a serious threat. Despite the doubts and criticisms, Paul remains steadfast in his pursuit of a fight against Alvarez. He sees it as an opportunity to test his limits and prove himself against one of the greatest boxers of this generation. Paul has stated that challenging Alvarez puts pressure on him to improve as a fighter and that he is determined to achieve his dreams, regardless of what others may think. Ultimately, whether or not a fight between Jake Paul and Canelo Alvarez ever comes to fruition remains to be seen. However, the very possibility of such a matchup has generated considerable buzz and discussion within the boxing world, highlighting Paul's